Okay, so next up is Fiona Tay. She's a Ruby and JavaScript developer for Pivotal Labs, based out of San Francisco, and she's going to be talking to us about why JRuby.
Oh wait, no. This worked, right? You guys can hear me? Yeah! All right, so I'm really excited to be here because I actually used to live in the Inland Empire. So anyone else here from the Inland Empire? Yeah! All right. So the first thing I want to say about my talk is that originally on the schedule it says why I like JRuby and you should like it too. But that's not actually what my talk is about. My talk's actually about why you should use JRuby sometimes and not other times. All right. So just for a quick introduction, JRuby is an implementation of Ruby on top of the JVM. So now you know what JRuby is. And JRuby, the J stands for Java. So in this presentation, I'm going to be telling you why you should be using JRuby. And this is from the perspective of somebody like me who just wants to make web apps. I'm not going to tell you anything about compiler internals. Hopefully you don't care about that. And this is about the good, the bad, and the ugly, just like that movie. So a little about me. I'm a Rubyist. I've been doing Ruby for about 3 years. And I mainly do Rails. Yay, Rails. So I'm also a JRubyist. For the last 6 months, I've been working on this product called Open Chorus. It's an open source initiative. It's basically a collaborative platform for data analysis. Think of it as Google Docs for data scientists. And as far as I know, we are one of the biggest JRuby projects out there. We have over 10,000 tests. That's a lot. All right, so now I'm going to tell you a little bit more about JRuby. So JRuby is a Ruby implementation. So to switch your project over from Ruby to JRuby, it's basically step 1, install JRuby, and step 2, write Ruby code. So here's a code sample. If you're using RVM, all right, yeah. So if you guys are using RVM to manage your Rubies, then it's as simple as typing RVM use. And if you're not using RVM, you should consider using it or RBM to manage your Rubies. And it's the same as normal Ruby. So they're interchangeable to an extent. Hopefully 1 + 1 is the same under all Ruby implementations. If you find that that's not true, let me know and I'll help you report a bug. So the most popular implementation is MRI, otherwise known as Matt's Ruby implementation. And it's basically the default Ruby. So if you don't know what Ruby you're using, you're probably using MRI. So I guess most of you are using MRI. Then the next most popular one is JRuby, which is what I'm talking about. And then there are also a couple of other red-headed stepchildren. No offense, man. So under the hood, how do these Ruby implementations work? Well, you write Ruby code and it's interpreted by an interpreter. Yes, not rocket science. But in JRuby, the implementation of the interpreter is written using the Java virtual machine. And that's basically your secret sauce because a lot of the benefits of using JRuby come from how awesome this implementation is. Shout out to the JRuby team. So as I said earlier, these implementations should be interchangeable. But that's not really true because some implementations are different. And you could say that some implementations are more equal than others. So some of the important differences that occur even though 1 + 1 = 2 is speed of execution. Well, how good is the implementation? Support for external libraries and implementation bugs. Sadly, the Ruby spec is not really well laid out, and MRI is popularly known as a reference implementation. So history of JRuby, it's been around since 2002, which makes it kind of old now. It's actually older than the latest 1.9 Ruby interpreter, and it has had traction in real projects since 2005. So JRuby in the real world, ThoughtWorks has really popularized using JRuby in the enterprise because Java is used in a lot of enterprise projects. And you guys might not know this, but Twitter started out as a Rails app on plain MRI, and after a few years and they were experiencing scaling problems, they did change over to JRuby for a short while, but sadly today they're not part of the Ruby community. Well, they are, kind of. But they run on the Scala stack mainly now. So the good. This is the exciting part, guys. So here's the first compelling reason for why you should use JRuby is access to Java libraries. Well, everyone and his dog writes Java. Well, maybe not their dogs, but there's a lot of enterprise software out there written using Java. And I'd like to highlight some of the most important libraries that are available using JRuby. So if you're any of you guys interested in doing natural language processing, yeah, yeah, that's it. So the Stanford parser is the NLP library of choice, and it's implemented in Java. And if you're using JRuby, you can call it just like it was a Ruby library. The next one is email. Yes, I know Action Mailer is part of Rails, but Action Mailer doesn't provide a lot of fine-grained control, especially if you want to play with headers or do anything fancy. Java Mail is actually a really great library. I haven't used it, but I've heard it's great, and there's actually a Ruby wrapper around it. So how do you do this? So JRuby has really deep integration with Java. I'm not really sure what the JRuby team did, but they made a really great user experience. You can directly call Java code from Ruby. So I'm going to show you a code snippet for this use case. Suppose you wanted to create a desktop app using Ruby, and you didn't know of any good Ruby libraries for doing that. So anyone know of any good Java libraries for desktop apps? Did I hear a swing? Ding, 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 we have a winner. All right, so what does it look like to call Java code? Well, the first step is to require Java so they can use Java code. Then you'll notice that in this code, we are setting up a few components for the desktop app. And you'll notice that this looks almost like a canonical Ruby code. So you can call the constructor just like a Ruby constructor. And the second part, which is I think is really cool, is that in Java, the convention is to use camel case for your method names, but in JRuby you can call these methods using their underscore equivalent. So you don't have to worry about your code looking too ugly, even though the camel case version works too. So apart from that, you can also use libraries that are written in other languages built on top of the JVM, such as Scala, Clojure, and Groovy. Scala is a really popular language for functional programming, and JRuby has special support for that. And Clojure is also another really popular language. Don't tell anyone, but you heard it here first. Clojure is the new sexy. So, and if you're lucky, somebody has already made a Ruby gem that wraps a Java library, so you won't even have to deal with the Java code itself. And just a friendly pointer, it would be better if you're planning on calling out to Java code. It's also a good design pattern to wrap it in a gem rather than calling the Java code sprinkled throughout your Ruby code, because it kind of looks ugly. So the next compelling reason is that with JRuby, it offers easier app development. But I would like to point out that this is not really that's not really precise, because I don't think anything can be easier than git push Heroku master. So it's only really relevant if you're deploying to a large server system, or if your sysadmin is deploying it to a large server system. So the advantage of using JRuby is that there are tools for you to leverage existing Java-based deployment infrastructure, and it comes in really handy if you have a sysadmin who is deploying your project who's familiar with the Java deployment stack. So the primary tool for this is called Warbler. Warbler is a Ruby gem which provides a number of rig tasks, yay rig, that help you compile your app into a single binary WAR file. And this is a standard Java deploy file format. So it's, if you have a sysadmin who has been deploying WAR files before, then you can just give them this other WAR file, and they'll be like, they wouldn't even have to know that it was a Ruby project, unless you told them, of course. So apart from that, there are a number of other deployment options. The most important one is TalkBox, or maybe not the most important one, but one prominent one. TalkBox provides additional services on top of your server that you might want, such as load balancing or clustering. So the third most compelling reason about using JRuby is that it offers better performance. Simply put, it's a better compiler than MRI, and it benefits from improvements to the JVM, which is continually under development. As you might know, Java 7 is out, and it has special support for dynamic languages, which JRuby leverages, and I've heard latest reports that this makes it even faster. Another point is that because the JRuby compiler is a just-in-time compiler, running your app on top of JRuby actually makes your app go faster as time goes on. Kind of like how wine gets better over time, except that your app is running and not in a wine cellar. Alright, so another reason for better performance is that you have access to highly optimized Java libraries. So what I mean by that is that, for instance, if you want to parse XML using JRuby, it's really fast because you can use the Java library for XML parsing. Yeah, Java is really good at XML parsing. Okay, so the bad. So these are like some really important caveats, and I think that this is something that's not really talked about enough, because with any choice of technology, you should be aware of what the downsides are. Gem availability. Some gems are just not available under JRuby. Sad face. So what's the deal on this situation? Gems written in pure Ruby work with JRuby. Gems with C extensions don't work with JRuby. But what does this mean for you? Typically, these gems written using C extensions are older, less maintained gems. So it's really not that big a deal. Sometimes you can fix the existing gem. Like some gems will claim that they're not JRuby compliant, but it could be as simple as changing out dependencies that they are using. For instance, a lot of gems, they say that their dependency is the canonical markdown processing gem, but they're actually really good alternatives to that. They're compatible with just JRuby and MRI. So it could be as simple as that. In my experience, on my project, we actually tried to patch a gem called Q Classic, which is a lightweight job management system developed by Heroku. It actually took more work than expected, which was a bad thing. The reason why it took so long was that we were doing some complicated database transactions, and the way that you interact with the database is really different with C extensions and MRI and the Java-based database adapters. But the caveat is your mileage may vary. So the way that I would generalize this problem of gem availability is that it's basically a platform trade-off. With any platform that you choose, there are some things that are better supported and some things that are not as well supported. So it really depends on which kind of libraries are more important to you, because with JRuby you get the Java libraries, which is a huge thing, but you lose out on some of the gems that are not compatible with because of the C extensions. So another downside that applies to those of you who do TDD, at my company, Pivotal Labs, we do test-driven development. So that means that during development, we're continually running tests, like, a few times an hour, and there's a long app startup time, especially when you have large Rails projects, mainly due to Rails class loading. And as you guys might know, Spork is a tool which helps reduce that, but Spork doesn't really work with JRuby. We've tried to make it work, but it hasn't. So that's a huge drag on developer productivity. And as far as we can tell, it's c'est la vie. There's nothing we can do about it. So another downside about using JRuby is that it's a less mature technology. MRI is still the default, and it has been for the past 20 years of Ruby. JRuby has definitely matured a lot since the past few years, and the JRuby core team is really responsive to bugs that we have reported. But this is still a problem because, for instance, libraries are developed against MRI. So there may be bugs in libraries that come up only when you're using JRuby, and that's really annoying because you have to fix that problem yourself. So the ugly. What's the ugly? Well, the ugly is basically everything that doesn't fit under the good or the bad, and for me, it's basically concurrency. So what is concurrency? Concurrency is when several computations are executing simultaneously and potentially interacting with each other. That's the Wikipedia definition. But what does it mean for JRuby? So MRI doesn't have real threads, and I think that this was something that was mentioned in an earlier talk. MRI's implementation of Ruby has a global interpreter lock, and basically when you have a global interpreter lock, your threads don't really execute in parallel. While JRuby has real threads, that's great, that's awesome. So why is it awesome? So threads are actually a major innovation in the history of computing. They've been around for maybe about 30 years, and they're really important for concurrent programming. And the fact that MRI doesn't have it should really be a cause for concern. And I'm sure that in the future, maybe people will all move to JRuby because they like concurrency. Who knows? So why is concurrency great? Well, concurrency is great because your program executes more quickly. But why is that better? Well, one of the big reasons is it makes your program cheaper to scale because you can run your web server in multiple threaded modes. So let me give you an example. Suppose you're running one physical server. On one physical server, you can run maybe 2 Ruby processors. That's because Ruby is really memory intensive. But on one server that you're using JRuby, you can probably use 2 Ruby processors, but you can run them with 4 threads each, which basically means you get 4 times the performance for the same buck. So this is also applicable even if you're not managing your own servers. You can use JRuby on Heroku such that with one dyno you can get more bang for your buck. So one point I want to make about this is that concurrency is not free. So what do I mean by concurrency is not free? Well, running a program in multi-threaded mode isn't that easy. Even up to now, there's still bugs in non-thread safe libraries. I did a quick search on GitHub, and there have been bugs reported in Rails and Airbrake recently. The severity of these bugs may be varying, but it's still a point to keep in mind that libraries are developed without a focus on concurrency. And if there are bugs, you're probably going to be the first one to discover them. This especially applies if you're for concurrency and thread safety in your own app. Writing thread safe code is difficult, but it's something that's really important as hardware limitations face us. So concurrency is worth it because concurrency offers huge performance improvements. As hardware improves and we have a greater number of cores on each processor, this is something that MRI can't leverage, but JRuby can leverage. In fact, I would like to share a quote with somebody who told me about the experience of JRuby. They were spending over 20 grand a month on servers, and he said that it's irresponsible to run MRI if you're managing your own server farm. So take that as you wish. Threads are kind of the future, and as we reach hardware limitations, this is something that you might want to consider. So the decision. After I've told you all about JRuby, how can you decide whether you want to use JRuby? Well, the long and the short is JRuby is a non-standard choice, and that comes with its downsides. So should you use JRuby? Do you want to use Java libraries? Is your problem that you're trying to solve in a domain where there are extensive Java libraries? Do you want to interface with enterprise Java code? Do you want to do a domain where the Java alternatives are much faster than the C extensions? Like, for instance, do you want to parse XML? The second reason why you should use JRuby is, do you want to leverage Java-based deployment architecture? Is your app going to be deployed by system administrators who have no interest in learning how to deploy Ruby? And the third reason is, do you need good performance? I know that previously when I said about performance, I just said that it was a good thing, but that's not really true. It depends on the needs of your app. Do you anticipate having high load like Twitter, or is your app going to be visited by one person once a month? If you said no to all of the previous questions, then I would say that you shouldn't use JRuby. Although the downside to JRuby, i.e. that it's not a default implementation, may be small, any downside is bad downside in terms of economics. So if you had no compelling good reason to use JRuby, you should stick with MRI. But don't worry, even if you choose not to use JRuby now, we'll still be there for you in a few years when you realize that you have performance problems. Lots of people switch for performance problems, and Twitter is one of them. There are a lot of guides available on the internet from people who have done the switch. And if you want to get started with JRuby, I would recommend this utility released by the JRuby team, which helps you assess your project's readiness to switch over to JRuby by checking whether you have dependencies which are not JRuby compliant, or if you have code that may execute differently under JRuby. So I'd like to thank Pivotal Labs and the JRuby team, and thanks.